I find the entertainment behavior to be coming into the Sunday morning.
For sure.
That kind of behavior, not only on the part of the musicians who basically treat the thing as an entertainment object, right? But also on the part of the parishioners. And, by the time I left this whole thing, they were referring to the congregation as the audience. We were calling them that. We were calling the stage. I was watching this congregation that I served for 20 years go from, I couldn't believe how much they were singing because I had never been part of that world, to deer in the headlights, staring at the video screen. Not even staring at the real me, but staring at me up on the video screen,
Yeah.
And it was sad.
Welcome to City Square Podcast, where we talk with everyday people about faith and work. My name is Micah. My guest this episode is Johnny Simmons. He's a rock and roll Anglican from Houston, Texas, a drummer for the band the Rikkis, and he's also a music director at the Church of the Holy Trinity, which is a Reformed Episcopal Parish. How's it going, Johnny?
Going great. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am very pleased to have you on. So I don't know if you've seen any of our episodes, but every once in a while I play a game called Would You Rather? High Church Cringe Edition.
Yeah.
I figured at least a few of them were pretty applicable, and since you are in what I assume is a rather high church parish, I thought they might fit.
Okay.
So would you rather hear someone pray to Daddy God or sing about a sloppy wet kiss?
I would go with Daddy God because it's not as gay, and you can at least make a case for it.
All right.
Yeah, like your previous guest, I think it's a misunderstanding of Abba, but at least it's an honest misunderstanding.
I like it. Would you rather sing Oceans or Good Good Father?
I don't find Oceans to be as condescending towards the Lord. It's basically just a word salad, so I'd probably go with Oceans. I like the music to that better.
I will say that about Hillsong. They do produce their songs well.
They do. With Good Good Father, I kind of feel like we're kind of patting God on the head, and
interesting.
Yeah. I never liked playing that one. I can kind of see that.
Yeah. Interesting. Now I'm going to have that imagery in my head. Whenever I hear it, we don't sing it at my current church, thank God. But
yeah.
Right. Would you rather have Stephen Furtick deliver your funeral or Kenneth Copeland perform your wedding?
Well, I'm already married, but I would go with Furtick because my funeral is already planned out. It's going to be according to the prayer book, and I have some grand hymns already selected. So I would hope that would minister to him and maybe cause him to convert.
Love it. All right. High liturgy. Would you rather have high liturgy with no communion or a contemporary service with communion?
I would rather have the sacrament than not, so I guess I would go contemporary.
I felt like that wasn't as hard for you as some other people. Some other people have agonized over their decision.
Yeah, well, I mean, are we talking about just one service, or are we talking about that's what I have to deal with? Because, I can't go without, so.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I'll spare you any of the other ones, but thanks for playing.
Hey, we're not gonna go deep into Lutheran theologians.
No, not yet.
Okay,
not yet. That's for later.
Yeah. I'll go with Cranmer, Hooker, and Andrews.
Lancelot Andrews.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get to watch the one with Father James?
I did not.
Okay. So I had,
but I really like the podcast, so I'm kind of going through it. I
cool.
moonlight as a delivery driver, so I burn up a lot of podcasts. So yours is very interesting. I'm looking forward to going through the episodes.
Awesome, thank you for saying that. That's nice of you.
Of course.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. I get to talk to a lot of interesting people, and because I find stories interesting, right, and people interesting. regardless of, the church background or lack of church background. So,
well, and it's a great format because if there's anybody you're like, hey, I should have that dude on, you can just do it.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so, and for those of you who don't know, I met Johnny on Twitter. I think you were corresponding with somebody else about a song that you wrote. And I don't know if would you classify it as a hymn, or is it like more like a spiritual song? I know there's some difference in definition.
We tend to refer to it as the drinking hymn.
The drinking hymn. Cool. Yeah. We'll kind of get into that later, but that's how we met.
We'll get to that.
A few weeks ago, really. And full disclosure, whenever I see you post on Twitter or comment, I'm like, man, we are thinking alike in these situations. So
cool.
Then I was like, man, I got to have him on the podcast. So
yeah. Well, Twitter takes a lot of abuse, but man, it has in a lot of ways been a real blessing to me. There's a whole little kind of Anglican Twitter subculture, and I know all these guys, and especially starting in 2020, but we've continued since then. I'll have a Anglican Zoom happy hour, or Anglican Twitter Zoom happy hour, and I've met some great people, man. So
nice.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah. So I came into the LCMS about 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I have there's a similar group of online friends that I've developed, since then, that we kind of do the same sort of thing. No actual Zoom happy hours, but we hang out a lot and post memes and laugh at people.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
So, let's walk it back then. So, will you walk me through your upbringing? Were you raised in the church? What was your childhood like?
I'm from League City, Texas, which at the time was a small town between Houston and Galveston. Now it's pretty much a Houston suburb, but I had kind of both somewhat of a small town upbringing, but it was very much a stereotypical 70s suburban kind of upbringing. My dad was one of many people that moved to that area to work at the Space Center in the Bay Area, and my dad worked for Lockheed. His side of the family is from Utah, and they're Mormon, and he left the Mormon church right out of high school. He didn't buy any of it, and pretty much lived most of his life as kind of a agnostic, vaguely spiritual, maybe kind of, I don't know, Unitarian, Universalist kind of thing, but not formally. But I mean, that was kind of his outlook, spiritually.
Okay.
He would always refer to God, but never went to church, anything like that, and never led us in any kind of family prayer or anything like that. My mama was raised Methodist in Clyde, Texas. And so we would go to the Methodist church in League City week to week. So I was brought up in the church. It was all very nominal, I discovered I hadn't been baptized as a kid. So I got baptized at 12 when I was confirmed also. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. And, I was taught the faith and I always believed it. But interestingly, though, like right after I was baptized and confirmed, my parents divorced and I lived with my mom and we stopped going to church. Okay. So I spent my late teen years, most of my 20s, basically living as an apostate, and I was in the rock and roll world. So, it could have been much worse, but, I was not walking with the Lord. I would try to justify a lot of stuff with a kind of vague dismissal of organized religion and, the Bible's written by men and all that kind of nonsense. But I would say that deep down inside, I always knew it was true. And I was just trying to suppress that. Yeah. And I always had some kind of a moral sense and some kind of a, not quite conservatism, but I was not as wild of a rock and roll guy as I could have been. I
Sure.
definitely still had a sense of oughts, and that led to me trying to find a foundation for that. And so what happened in my kind of mid-20s, I started, I was, I guess, searching for a kind of purity, in the sense that I was working out all the time. I'd stopped drinking. I was actually living a celibate lifestyle, even though I was a rock and roll guy, but, I wasn't in love. So I thought it was wrong, just a very kind of, humanistic kind of worldly way of trying to be good, I suppose. But I was reading a lot of stuff, and eventually, I guess if we're going to call this my conversion experience, I was coming home from a tour of Japan with some of the guys that I play with now. And I was bored out of my mind because I'd blown through all the books that I took with me. And at the LAX airport at 6:30 in the morning, I bought The Problem of Pain by Lewis. Okay. It looked interesting. That whole topic seemed kind of interesting to me. And got on the flight from LAX to Houston, and somewhere over Phoenix, I was confronted with Lewis's famous passage about how Jesus does not allow us to think of him as a guru or as a moral teacher or a philosopher. He's either a lunatic, or he's a liar, or he's who he claimed to be, right?
Right.
So I would like to say it was this big weepy conversion or whatever, but it was very matter of fact, because I was just like, well, I don't think Jesus was crazy. I don't think Jesus was a con man. That means he is the Lord. Jesus, I think I'm going back to church. That's what it was. So
That's awesome.
Yeah. And but it, like I said, it was also matter of fact. I was like, well, I got to go where this leads, and
Yeah.
I still didn't know very much. So I just figured, well, I'm a Methodist. I'm going to go to a Methodist church, and started doing that. Now, I will say, even during my 20s, I would always on Christmas find a Methodist church with a candlelight service, because I just felt like I needed to be there. So, like I said, I think that my spiritual gift is actually faith. And so I always knew, I've never really doubted the Lord's existence or that the Bible is true. I just never really have. I tried to act like I did, but yeah. So anyway, ended up back in the church, and then that began kind of a strange journey to where I'm at now.
Yeah. It almost sounds like there was some, either, if you want to call it common grace or providence or the Holy Spirit, kind of restraining you from going full off the deep end, because I'm sure you had the opportunity to completely mess your life up.
Yes, because this was the 80s and the 90s in the rock and roll heavy metal scene, so yeah, it could, I always say, if I had a biography, it would be titled "It Could Have Been Worse," but it really could have. And the Lord really did protect me. And not totally. I have bad things on my conscience, I'm so thankful I'm forgiven for them. And hopefully that will help me talking to people coming from my same background,
Yeah.
But God really did preserve me. Actually, I was just talking to someone the other day about how happy I am that when I sailed up next to rock stardom, we didn't quite make it, and I went back to being a local musician, because I really don't think I could have handled it. If I had moved to LA in those days and been in that scene, I really think I couldn't have handled it. So God was very kind to me.
Yeah. It's always something to think about when, like, if you get what you're dreaming of and what you're aiming for, what happens when you get there, when you have fame and when you have money, when you have, the temptation. It's not quite exactly the same. I grew up homeschooled, so very sheltered in a lot of ways, But I've even looked back on my life and been like, man, I'm kind of thankful that I was homeschooled and not in public school, because
Yeah.
my life would not be the same.
Right.
Like I may have ended up at the same place, even married to the same woman, and in the same town that I live in now. But I don't know that the journey would have been the same,
Exactly.
because I had very little restraint as at least self-restraint. I had parents and church as God's gifts to me in that, but
right. Well, you're supposed to disparage them now, apparently, because now you're weird.
I am so weird. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's okay. But it's like, well, now the cool kids don't like me, and I resent that. And see, I always basically say a lot of like the ex-evangelical whole thing is basically you hate your parents, and you need to get over it. So anyway. But yeah, because I mean, I grew up, like I said, very typical 70s kid, public school. Once you hit middle school, there's just expectations about your life. You're going to sneak around your parents. You're going to drink. You're going to smoke pot. You're going to, try to get with your girlfriend, all that kind of stuff. And that was just, everybody did that. That's just how it was. And it's not good, man. And as much as people want to disparage homeschoolers, especially the early days where, you really were an oddball for doing it,
it's true.
That's people. I mean, and I'm talking about in my day. I mean, I'm an old man, so I'm talking about the 70s. But can you imagine today having a kid in public school? No way.
No, heck no. Thankfully, I've got a child in charter classical school.
Cool.
And another one who's not in school yet. So
yeah,
I'm on the early end of the kid thing. I've got an 8-year-old or almost 8-year-old and a 2-year-old. So
cool.
Yeah. So you grew up nominally Methodist, came back to faith. How old were you? Mid-20s or early 20s?
I was about 25, 26. Yeah.
Okay.
And then
for someone coming, was that like UMC, or standard kind of?
Yeah. The small town little Methodist church in League City, it's a mainline denomination. I'm sure if I went back in as an adult and looked at those days, I would see all the problems. But it really, to me, just seemed like a legit. They hadn't gone off the rails with the liberalism and stuff in those days.
Yeah,
probably. And the parish that I started attending when I got right with the Lord, kind of the same thing. I mean, I ran into some stuff there that concerned me, but overall the staff and everybody were pretty solid. I mean, I have some differences with Methodism in general now, but that's adiaphora.
So how did you find your way to the REC then?
Okay. I should say during a lot of my rock and roll days in the 90s, I knew a bunch of people who were going to the church that would become the parish I go to now. Some of them still are there. Okay. So I knew all these guys and I knew they all went to church and stuff, but I just knew them from the music scene. So that's going on in the background. When I started going back to church, I was also in a period as a musician where I was kind of wanting to get out of the local rock and roll bar scene kind of thing that I was doing. And this was my artsy era. Okay. And so I left that and I was doing a lot of I was teaching drums. That was my main living at the time. And I was doing just all this kind of artsy, proggy drum stuff. And I was playing in clubs by myself and doing all this kind of weird stuff. But a friend of mine that I had known, one of those church guys named Frank Hart, had a band called Atomic Opera, who they had been kind of a big deal, especially around Houston and stuff. But, they were a legit band. They were on MTV and all that stuff. He had a record release party for one of their records, and they didn't have a drummer. So he knew that I was kind of a mercenary you can hire to come play, right?
Sure.
So started rehearsing with them and playing with them and got to know them. And he was surprised to find out I was going to church, and we had a lot of conversations. And one of the guys in the band was my dear friend Kemper Crabb. Probably a lot of your listeners are too young to know who Kemper is, but some might. That he's kind of a proto Christian rock pioneer.
Okay.
He's a brilliant theologian and teacher, and he became a good friend. And we would just be talking about things, and he has a way of just kind of figuring out where you're at and just saying, hey, you ought to check this out then. If you think this, you might want to read this guy. Gave me Michael Horton's Putting Amazing Back into Grace, which is just a little booklet on Reformation theology. And and I was just like, well, yeah. And so I was starting to move in a more reformed way than the Methodist Church, for sure. And at the same time, we were talking a lot about worship and about liturgy. And I knew that by then, the church they were going to had it was a really interesting place where they were practicing a higher liturgy, but it was all rock and roll guys doing it, and artists and stuff. And so obviously that appealed to me as an artsy kind of guy or whatever. So I started basically studying a lot of Kemper's teaching about worship. And a lot of that was also coming from, I would find out from my late bishop, Roy Grote. And I started to come to the conclusion that even though the Methodist church I was going to was pretty formal, that the whole kind of contemporary camp meeting format had not completely taken over a lot of churches. So I would later find out that so much of the Methodist worship that I grew up with was just watered down Book of Common Prayer. And so they were still kind of doing that, but I was looking for something, like communion every week and, a little more formal liturgy. And I started thinking, well, that means I can either go Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Lutheran, or Anglican, and the first two were right out. Because I was already kind of a Reformed sort of chap, right? Lutheranism, I had no beef with. I just didn't know much about it. But I had a friend who went to an Episcopal church, and I visited that parish, and that was it. I was there for, 2 or 3 years till I kind of ran into the mainline liberal buzzsaw and realized I needed to move. But this parish had a very high, they were using the 1979 Book of Common Prayer, but they were using the Rite 1, which is the traditional rite, but had all the smells and bells, chanting psalms, all of that. And I really found that is what I was looking for in terms of how I feel like I should worship the Lord. And then, like I said, I kind of ran into the liberal chainsaw there or buzzsaw there once the rector that I had first met when I went there left. And I was introduced to someone. Do you know who Jay Budziszewski is?
I do not know.
Okay. He's now Roman Catholic, but he's kind of he's a professor at UT, or was. I don't know if he's retired yet. But at the time he was an Episcopalian, and he had written a book called How to Stay Christian in College. And he was speaking at a church, a Baptist church, where I was just hired to play drums on Sunday nights. Because by this time I kind of started playing a little worship music and stuff too. And I had told him, I know you're Episcopalian, and how do we stay Christian in a liberal denomination? And so he introduced me to a priest friend of his at what is now it's kind of known as the conservative Episcopal parish here in Houston. And I met his priest friend, and he invited me to church there. And, it was more of a safe haven. And so I was there for the rest of my days as an Episcopalian, which ended in 2003 when the homosexual Gene Robinson was consecrated a bishop, and that kind of became the straw that broke a lot of camels' backs, even though the problem had been going on, since the 60s.
Sure.
Well, I was part of a group from that church that was going to break away and plant this makes no sense, but like an independent Anglican parish. Okay. And they were going to be under the oversight of several jurisdictions until they kind of figured out what was going on. Well, it was originally planned to be like 200 or 300 people, but it ended up being about 30, as these things often do, And by the time that thing had kind of run its course and just wasn't going to make it, we were already meeting at Holy Trinity in the evenings. And all along, like my friends in the Reformed Episcopal Parish there were just saying, why don't y'all just join the church? And, I now see what a mistake it was to just not submit and just go be part of something that's already going on, especially as Anglicans, we're Catholic in that sense. And there's no sense in trying to go do your own thing,
Right.
So anyway, we ended up kind of rolling into, the few of us who were left, rolling into Holy Trinity about 2004. So I've been there about 20 years now. And I should have gone there back in like 1991 or 92 when I first met these guys. When I got right with the Lord, if I had been just a little sooner hanging out with the guys in my band, I probably would have ended up there, but God knew what he was doing, and I always say there's so many people who end up in a Anglican Lutheran kind of place when they come from either a liberal mainline or even an evangelical background. So many of those guys end up on a journey, and they end up Roman or Orthodox. Not me, man. In the Reformed Episcopal Church, I've just found my home. I really have. And okay, and I will say, and this may weird out some of your viewers, listeners. This parish and our parish up in Tyler, which were the first churches to be brought into the REC west of the Mississippi when Bishop Grote came out here as a missionary, they were all wrapped up in the Reconstructionist movement in like the 80s and 90s. Okay. And I was very simpatico with that too, even though I didn't know what any of it was called. Once again, my friend Kemper was like, hey, you should check out David Chilton. I'm like, yep. So I still loosely kind of will even identify as a recon, even though that's kind of like, it's kind of fizzled out. I mean, Bishop Sutton is the bishop of the presiding bishop of the Reformed Episcopal Church now. So we're not all exactly like rabid polemic writing theonomists anymore, but I still kind of lean that way in a lot of ways. So much of what was going on in the RE was just kind of hit my sweet spot when it comes to worship and just how I thought. And maybe for some of the listeners too, the Reformed in Reformed Episcopal doesn't necessarily mean Calvinist. Okay.
Right.
The REC was just when a lot of evangelicals left the Episcopal Church in 1873. So it was the Reformed Episcopal Church. Although, I'd say most of our clergy lean that way. And I would say, as my friend Frank calls it, I'm kind of Calvin-y, but we are not anymore just Presbyterians with a prayer book, but So anyway, it was a weird long journey, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm home for the rest of my life.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So your parish is quite high church, as they would say.
Yeah. Those high and low is kind of a loaded terminology, and it means something different in the US than it does in England. Like if someone says they're high church in England, you basically assume they're not a Christian. It's the low church evangelicals who are faithful, and so they won't have anything to do with a lot of the formality and even things like vestments, and
It's
things like
almost
that.
like history's repeating itself in a way.
Yeah, sure. And
Yeah.
but yes, I would say at Holy Trinity, our worship is very high in the sense that it's very formal. We use the Book of Common Prayer. Um, we sing a lot of the liturgy. There's
Hmm.
chanting, um, incense, candles. I know that's scandalous, but we have lights on the altar. So in that sense, it's high, and we use the 1662 liturgy of the Book of Common Prayer. So it's all of these and thous and all of that.
Sure.
But at the same time, I mean, we're a t-shirt and jeans kind of crowd. So we're all just hanging out, and then once we're in church, it's all business, and then when it's over, we're hanging out again. So it really is a really interesting parish.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of, obviously in the Baptist and evangelical circles, there was the whole worship wars over, um, the new thing coming in, contemporary
Mhm.
music. And obviously, well, I think there's been a lot of development because there was contemporary music, and now and that was just music by artists calling themselves Christians, and
Right.
there was the whole kind of performance thing, and then I feel like it shifted into kind of the worship industry, and it
Absolutely. And
started to be, yeah, it
I
started to be
was
like the bands and the churches, writing the
Mhm.
songs. Obviously, there's a few juggernauts right now,
Right. I was
so
part of the early days of that. So I started playing in worship bands in probably about 98. So that's when all those wars were happening, and
yeah.
that's when the switch was kind of being made from even in the so-called traditional services, you would be moving from choir and organ to an orchestra with a rhythm section and maybe a few singers with the mics. So yeah, and
Yep.
I played a lot with some of the early pioneers in the worship industry, and
Hmm.
I was part of it until, say, about 4 or 5 years ago, and I walked away from it.
Any particular reason why, or
Yes. I was very concerned with the conflation of entertainment and worship. Because when I first started doing it, there was CCM and there was worship music. And like you
yeah.
said, there were contemporary people doing worship songs. I mean, my parish, we still do a lot of like John Michael Talbot and stuff. So there were guys with guitars writing worship songs, and you had the kind of praise choruses and that kind of thing. But
Hmm.
you would still have, these are Christians who just happen to do music, you know, and some of it's overtly Christian, some of it isn't, but it's
Right.
entertainment music. And then over here is the worship music. And sometimes these bands, like my friends in Caedmon's Call, they would do a worship album, and I played with those guys at their church. But
Hmm.
the worlds didn't collide yet.
Yeah.
But man, as I was out there in that world and playing at all the mega churches, did the big Bible studies. We did the big one up here at A&M for 4 years, traveled to all the big summer camps and all that kind of stuff. You saw those worlds starting to mesh. And now it's such that I basically think worship music is entertainment for Christians anymore. And I
Yeah.
could see it. I could just see the behaviors changing.
Hmm.
A lot of people will say, well, I worship all throughout the week too, on my way to work or whatever. And I don't find it to be going in that direction. I find the entertainment behavior to be coming into the Sunday morning.
Oh, for sure.
That kind of behavior, not only on the part of the musicians who basically treat the thing as an entertainment object, right? But also on the part of the parishioners. And, by the time I left this whole thing, they were referring to the congregation as the audience. We were calling them that. We were calling the stage the stage. I was watching this congregation that I served for 20 years go from, I couldn't believe how much they were singing because I had never been part of that world, to deer in the headlights, staring at the video screen, not even staring at the real me, but staring at me up on the video screen,
Yeah.
And it was sad. It was really sad. So, I spent a lot of time in that industry. What me and my dear friend Eric Nitzberg, bass player, used to call working the inside, where we thought, if I just show up and do a good job, I can have some influence away from some of that stuff if people will listen. And I will maybe earn the right to be heard by serving well. That's what I thought I was doing. It was not what I was doing. and God kind of showed me that my time in that was done through several circumstances. One of them was losing a gig. One of them was my parish approaching me about being the music director formally. And it really became apparent to me that what I thought I was doing was not what I was there to do. I think I did learn what I was there to do. And once it was done, it was time to go. And now, man, I have no desire to be part of that world anymore. I'd rather just play rock and roll. I always say, if I'm going to be an entertainer, I want to be honest about it.
Interesting. What would you say then because there's the debate that I see happen, and this even happens with me and some of my friends who are in like a more standard kind of Baptist, non-denominational style of church. Mm-hmm. What would you say to the arguments of, it doesn't matter the style, it's all preference. What matters is your heart, your sincerity. Is that a good reason? Do you find that lacking in any way, or like what makes like high liturgy in the general sense, at least? What makes that right or better?
Well, I will not say that. I'm not going to say that, like, unless you're following the prayer book, you're not worshiping at your best.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I really began to hang my hat on, at least a decade ago. A guiding principle for me in worship has always been the book of Hebrews, because basically that's what it's about. Okay. Specifically, when you get into chapter 12, and it talks about how you have come to Mount Zion and the heavenly Jerusalem, and that all the high liturgy was always predicated on the idea that the church worships in heaven. And so we should do what they do. And that's why so much of the language is taken from the Revelation and things like that. Well, that chapter concludes with, let us serve the Lord acceptably with reverence and godly fear. So acceptable service implies unacceptable service. So if I want to know what God finds acceptable, it's going to be reverent and it's going to show fear. Right? And you can find that all throughout the scriptures. You can find it in, rejoice with trembling in Psalm 2. You can find, even when we're told to enter into his gates with thanksgiving and with praise, that's all done in a reverent and awe-filled fashion. So, I would very cautiously say form is somewhat not important. So much, as long as it's done with that sense of a broken and contrite heart, reverence, fear, thanksgiving, that sort of thing. But I would balance that also with, in a lot of ways, the medium is the message. Mm-hmm. So if, again, if we're like, Daddy God, you're a good, good father, word salad, romantic, gobbledygook, well, you're not showing, I would say that's irreverent. And I would say there's a lot of, another reason I wanted to get out of the whole worship industry is there's so much of a kind of getting up in front of God and pleasing ourselves and calling that our worship. and he's somehow obligated to like it because he's God. It's like, no, I don't think so. So that said, I'm sure. I'm not. I don't have to speculate. I have been in contemporary situations that were exactly what I'm talking about. Reverent, showing God proper veneration. I would have nothing to criticize it for except for my own preferences. And it's important to recognize that. But you do have your preferences. But I'm not going to condemn something just based on the fact that it doesn't meet that.
Right.
Does that make any kind of sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Did you find that kind of thing when you were looking into the LCMS?
Yes, for sure. I came in more on theological convictions and not liturgical convictions. Because the church that I was in, I looked back and I discovered it had radically shifted. So it used to be songs that were a lot of original songs. I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Bleeker.
Yeah.
So I used to go to his church where he was the worship minister.
Okay.
And starting back in like 2011 or so. So my wife and I were there for about 9-10 years.
Okay.
And I looked back and I could see that the style had shifted slowly. Like they started bringing stuff in, like the keys would play during prayer.
Yeah.
That
makes it more holy.
Yeah. I mean, and I was like, okay, this is just emotional manipulation. Like that's what I was over here, thinking to myself. And the music changed from, kind of Keith and Kristen Getty style, scripture, psalms, theologically rich music in a contemporary style.
Mm-hmm.
And it shifted to the majority, like Hillsong, Elevation, Bethel, and the church at the time was kind of experimenting with a charismatic phase as well.
Right.
So it was, and I was like, this is like, am I just an idiot for like thinking that this isn't good? Like, or this is less than what it could be or subpar,
Yeah.
Let alone the issues of, financially supporting ministries that are heretical in at least a few ways.
Yeah, we can go down that road if you want to.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I didn't come in and initially saying, I said, okay, there's some problems with this, but I don't have a problem with drums in a band.
Yeah.
I grew up in a fundamental Baptist church. So like piano was the sole instrument we used, maybe some orchestral instruments, a lot of Methodist hymns and revivalist hymns and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a non-contemporary environment, very traditional, and then moved to a contemporary environment and then saw that shift from, relatively speaking, theologically sound songs into, what dominates the airwaves now.
Yeah. And that was around the time that I was speaking of, where I was watching the congregation change, and I was watching, even, keeping the keyboard pad and all that sort of stuff. Some of that's emotional manipulation, but some of that is also showbiz, because you can't have any quiet. You can't have any downtime. You got to have, keep it going, baby. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've really discovered the richness of a liturgical service, and I wouldn't even consider my church super high church. I know Lutherans don't use high versus low.
Right.
We are liturgical, but we have like a blended service with some contemporary songs.
Right.
And things like that. So it's not like, I wish we did more chanting. Let's just say that.
Well, we're blended too. And, but I don't even call it that. We do everything from psalm chants to City of Light,
City of Light's great. I love their their stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good old low church Australian Anglicans.
Yeah. Well, Australia is another place where it's kind of like England. Like if you're a real legit believer, chances are you're a church like theirs is, But I
Yeah,
love them.
that's interesting.
They have such a everyman kind of presentation, which is exactly what you want in a worship leader.
Yeah, they're not there to be the star of the show.
Nope.
Yeah, which in fairness, the church that I was part of for a long time, they were never they weren't the full production star, prancing up there. It wasn't as showy as a lot of other places. So
yeah.
I don't want to throw them under the bus completely. I've got friends there that I'm trying to convince, that there's a better way, but that way is, it could be worse. Let's say that.
But you do see those changes and you get concerned about it because it is concerning. And it's weird to be the one having those convictions while everyone's so rah about it because it's what they hear on the radio.
Well, and I've got friends who are kind of conflicted. And I'm not going to psychoanalyze them or give anything away, but they're talking about, well, I don't really like these songs, but I'm going to sing and I'm going to, and I'm like, well, aren't you? I've even asked them a couple times if they're like harming their conscience by singing these songs that they feel very convicted almost not to. It's a weird situation.
I could see that going.
Ultimately, ultimately I want them to be in a good place. And obviously I think I'm more correct than they are, but I still, and they think they're more correct. So it's all good.
Yeah. I do respect the submission to the elders who have decided that's what we're going to sing, as long as it's not bad. If I run into some situation where somebody doesn't like one thing that we're doing, it's like, I'm not asking you to like it. I'm asking you to sing it, So I respect that. But if you're, I don't know, obviously there's, like you said, there's a conscience issue to where, it's like, okay, if I'm singing something that I know is wrong, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Interesting. So you've actually written, I'm sure you've written a number of songs. The one that I'm more familiar with is called Raise a Glass to the King.
Mm-hmm.
So can you walk us through can you walk us through, like how you came to that idea, what started the process of songwriting that for you?
Sure. One of the more attractive things about Holy Trinity when people visit us is we have a quite robust men's fellowship. And our church is, some of the ladies of the church have said that our church is very masculine and it frees them up to be feminine. Both from the way that we worship, because, if you think about it, a very formal liturgy, especially when performed with gusto, is very militaristic, and but the men have always, like for 25, 30 years, they've had what we call Pipe Club, which once a month, all the guys get together. It's actually more Cigar Club anymore, but the guys would get together and smoke pipes, smoke cigars, drink beer, just fellowship. And it's been a formal thing at the church now for, pretty much as long as I've been there. In addition to that, that's what we do on Sunday afternoons. If you go to Holy Trinity, most people will get there for, say the 10:30 or 11 o'clock service. And then I'll go home around 3 because after church, we sit on the patio and some of the ladies and kids might be in the parish hall. Somebody may have gotten lunch and come back, but we'll sit around the patio and have a cigar and a couple of beers after church. And that's just what we do.
That's awesome.
And then once a year, we all go out to the hill country in Concan, Texas for 4 days of our men's retreat, where you might go shoot, you might go hike, you might go play golf. Many years I just sit there and look at the hills, because I need the break. And our our bishop would always come out with us. Bishop Sutton now comes out with us, and we have a Bible study every night and worship together. So anyway, during all those kinds of get-togethers, it's very common when someone pours a drink, just say, "To the King." Sorry, I didn't mean to hit my mic. "To the King." And one year before men's retreat, I was like, oh, I know what brought this on. One of our parishioners had found this, they called it a liturgy for the smoking of fine tobacco. And it was this very formal, long prayer giving thanks to God for the good things of the earth, for tobacco, for the people that planted it and rolled it, and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, that is awesome. And so it got me thinking, like, why don't we have a parish drinking song? And the chorus kind of wrote itself because it's like, "To the King, raise a glass to the King." So I'd come up with a chorus, and this was like the day before we left. And Houston to Concan's about a 4-hour or 5-hour drive. And I was riding with my pastor, and man, it just 7 verses just poured out of me on the way there. And we learned it, and we recorded it on someone's phone. There's someone's bad phone in like this 2007. I don't know. And it's just been something that, on Easter or some big celebration or every year at men's retreat, we'll just sing the song. Occasionally, occasionally we'll add a verse. Like when Bishop Grote died, we added a verse about him. I've been fortunate to have people record it, at different get-togethers around the country, and they'll send me video, and I'm always like, "Hey, if a verse pops into your head, sing it."
That's awesome.
Yeah. So,
I do want to record it.
You should.
I'm trying to figure out formatting and all that stuff. Because I read over the lyrics. I forget what I saw first. I don't think it was a video. I think it was just the actual sheet music.
Okay.
And I was just reading through it, and I was like, okay. I'm like, that's cool. Raise a glass to the King, sweet. And then I was going through the verses, and I'm like, holy crap! Like, these are great lyrics. Like, this is better than 90% of the contemporary stuff that's on the market.
Wow. Thank you.
So yeah, and I'm not saying that to like flatter you. Like, I'm like, man, this is really solid, theologically rich. It walks through, his life and death and resurrection, and what he accomplished for us. And I was like, this is awesome. I'm like, because I've got a group of friends. That's why we're toasting him. Yes. Well, and that's like, it's so, like I say, I don't want to overuse the word rich, but it's very theologically rich. And it's also very, very singable. Like, it reminds me kind of like a sea shanty or obviously a bar tune.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted, swing the mug 6/8 time, just a good, just a good, I guess almost like a Celtic kind of feel.
Yeah.
I
think that, and that's the sea shanty and kind of the pub song, Irish pub song. Those are some really like almost popular genres.
Yeah, man. I totally am getting into the shanty thing. I actually wrote one for Psalm 56, and
really,
yeah, because I forget who was. Oh, the guys up in Moscow that they have that one to the word that
yeah.
Did Wilson write that? I think he may have. But anyway, they did some great recordings of it. I'm like, yeah, man, that I could get into that. So I thought I'd try my hand at it.
That's something that, we've obviously, our culture has shifted radically over the last at least couple decades.
Yeah.
Because it used to be that, like, I remember my grandparents and parents, they grew up, they were a little older. So like I kind of grew up with like older boomer parents. And my maternal grandfather was a farmer. He was born in like 1913. So he and his wife got married later and had kids later, and and then my parents did that as well. So there was a bit of a generational shift.
Yeah. Same thing with me, man.
Yeah. So, we grew up like very musical family. We sang at, family reunions, and we would sing the doxology before we, ate
Oh, cool.
at, Christmas, Easter, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of digging into it a bit, it's like, men used to sing together.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't at church. It was just working in the fields. It was, on construction sites,
Right.
sitting around the campfire. That was part of the entertainment. Like you'd go
Mm-hmm.
to someone's house and, all right, hey, there's a piano. Let's sit down and sing.
And that's what
I
you
even saw
had.
that. Yeah. Yeah. The TV was not as ubiquitous, and obviously we didn't
Yeah.
have phones and the internet on call.
And in the older times too, like music publishing was literally that. It's like, oh, here's the sheet music, play it on the fiddle,
Yeah.
and that's how you heard a new song.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that. It's like a recapturing kind of that communal, fraternal, kind of essence there of
Yeah.
a little bit of that. If you're online at all, it's the return meme. Return
Yes.
to So return to monkey, return to. I'm like, well,
Yeah,
let's return to the kind of the fraternal bonds of singing and that sort of thing. So
yeah, that camaraderie.
yeah, I've got a group of friends who, it's a cigar group and a gaming group. And, so we're in that space a little bit too of fine tobacco and good drinks.
Cool.
But for us, it's Saturday night. So I would love to have one on Sunday afternoon. So that'd be awesome.
Yeah, man.
So
There's just something really cool about it. And, I think sometimes that can be a little bit dangerous because we're kind of known as that church where they drink and smoke, those are just the peripheral things about it, just more being about the men being men, and we're not trying to be, we're not trying to relate to one another as women, which, some people have kind of criticized Promise Keepers and that kind of stuff for. It's just, we're just dudes being dudes, and we're here for one another, and we're, comrades in arms, that kind of thing. And that's what I was going for with the song.
Yeah, I think it works. Do you find that the masculine versus feminine kind of plays out in the worship wars and stuff too? Because I find that gets thrown around a bit.
Yeah, I do. It's so funny. I remember, this is 10 years ago at least, watching an interview with Matt Redman, where he was even kind of saying, I'm kind of guilty of writing things that your average bloke wouldn't want to sing because he'd feel creepy about it. And he was saying how he was deliberately trying to get away from that. And I found that really admirable. And I always like Matt Redman. I think he's good.
He's got
good
some
dude.
solid reasons, or some 10,000 Reasons is one of his.
Yeah.
But some of his music I would say is a lot more theologically inclined versus emotive.
And the one time I actually saw him do his thing, between songs, all he would do is like pray or read a passage of scripture, and so he understood the job, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's so much of the worshiptainment kind of music right now is very feminized, and
well,
it's a big joke about Jesus being my boyfriend, and all that kind of stuff. But there is a lot of relating to him, like we're some forlorn teenager, and that's not a very masculine way to be.
So let me, I don't know, devil's advocate a bit. What's wrong with singing of, like, people will talk about how we are the bride of Christ, right? And my pet peeve is that the church is the bride. I am not Christ's bride on my own.
Right.
But is there any danger, or is it just like a less optimal thing to have a more feminine, emotive, and feminine? We're not using that necessarily in a derogatory sense. Just
right. Yeah.
It's more emotive. And what else? What else is there?
Well, yes, the church is the bride of Christ, but that's one analogy. among others that we don't absolutize. But there is a place for the emotions. I mean, golly, last Sunday, both me and my friend Ben, who sings with me, had various points where we got choked up. It got very moved by what we were doing. It wasn't necessarily this kind of like lovesick, romanticized kind of thing. I think the danger of feminization is to go more there, to make it so much about feeling and stuff that it gets very romantic, and I don't think that's a good thing at all.
So when you look at the kind of the worship industry, the contemporary music industry, are there any? So you mentioned City of Light; they're obviously a very solid church and band.
Yeah.
Any other artists that you like that you think are doing a good job in that kind of contemporary?
Sure. Going back to talking about blended music, we usually play a good 3 or 4 contemporary songs during communion. That's kind of where we mostly play that kind of stuff. I've used a lot of City of Light since I discovered them. The Gettys, of course. We call them the Matts, Matt Boswell and Matt Papa.
Mm-hmm.
They write some great stuff. I have some friends whose music I use: Sandra McCracken, Ross King, Todd Wright. People that I've known and either been big fans of, or with Ross and Todd, I've played with them a little bit, so I know their music, and I love it, and it's very, suited to our congregation. We got a Tomlin song we still do, or I'll do, like I said, we'll do stuff from the 70s, like John Michael Talbot and stuff like that. I mean, this had to do with one of your questions. I can't remember. I guess talking about traditional versus contemporary or something like that. My approach to selecting the music is neither of those. It's Catholic. Okay. And by that, I mean, I want to sing what the church in all places is doing. So whatever's kind of going on in all our churches around the country, I want to sing from all times. And I always use that Lewis quote about reading an old book for every new book you read. And then if we had access to books from the future, we should read those too. And that's how I look at music. I lean really heavy on hymns, but at the same time, we do what's going on now, and we write things. So, we were talking about that. I write a lot of stuff for the church. Not very often, but when I get inspired, it tends to be more functional. Like I need a prelude for Epiphany, or I need a postlude as people are leaving the church. Excuse me. Or, I'm real big on the Ascension. And so I've written a couple of songs. Actually, I wrote a song about Ascension Saturday in the parking lot of a grocery store. And it just came out of me, kind of like Raise a Glass did, where it's like, okay, that's done. So
nice.
Yeah. So I guess our music of the future is what we write. But several of our parishioners have written things for us. And so we're just, I'm trying to do a little bit of everything, and my people really follow that. I mean, everyone has their preferences, but blended usually implies the old people cross their arms for the new stuff, and the young people look bored during the old hymns. But my people sing everything, and they're great about it. So I tend to refer to it more as Catholic.
I like that. Yeah. I mean, and I know that's the focus of a lot of Anglicans and Lutherans as well, is like, we are the Catholic Church. Like Anglicans are the friend of mine, Father James. He was a priest in the REC. I think he changed from one diocese to another.
Is he in ACNA now?
Possibly, I think.
Yeah,
because REC I know they're a province, right? Or
We're kind of a sub jurisdiction of the ACNA. Okay. Yeah, haven't completely dissolved into it because there's some issues, but we'll work it out.
Right. Yeah, he used to call himself a Lutheran with apostolic succession. So
okay,
just to kind of rub it in there.
Right.
Yeah, but I know a lot of Lutherans would say we are the restored Catholic Church, and then Anglicans are like, well, we were in England before the Pope. Right. There is it's not like King Henry just decided to start a new church. It's like the church was existing there.
Right. When Gregory sent Augustine of Canterbury, he found Christians there, and they were like, "What do you mean that's when Easter is?"
So you may be familiar with this. The legend, I guess, is that it's Joseph of Arimathea is kind of often credited as the founder of the English church.
Yeah, it's tradition. Who knows? I like to think that's true. There's some people that think that Paul went to Britain too, but who knows? We'll have to ask him.
I'll have to look at my maps because I've got maps of all his journeys and
right, exactly. But suffice to say that there were Christians there from the beginning too, and most Anglicans would see themselves in some kind of continuity with that. That could be argued one way or the other, and whether the schism between the East and the West affected that, and how it did, and how the Reformation did. But my joke with people is always that I practice British Orthodoxy.
I like that. Yeah, my pipe dream is, I don't know if it's a pipe dream, but is for the confessional conservative Lutherans to unite with the ACNA, as long as the ACNA can kind of get a few things sorted out first.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but and this is crazy for people who are very familiar with the LCMS, but the REC and the LCMS have kind of come to an agreement that in places where one or the other church isn't there, we'll have communion with one another.
Really?
Yeah, and that's kind of unheard of for y'all.
Yeah, LCMS is very closed communion,
right?
And that's interesting.
Yeah, but there's some kind of agreement we've reached where, yeah. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah, I would like to see. I mean, well, I don't want to raise this issue, but eschatologically, I'm a postie and a very optimistic one. And I actually think we're kind of in the early days of the church still, so we'll work it all out.
Yeah. What is the term? Post-mills, or just optimistic amill, or is it the other way around?
I'll call it that. I don't mind.
Yeah,
I don't care what you call it.
99% of the Lutherans, I think, would be amill.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've encountered a few because my friend, the priest, is also post-mill.
Yeah.
So we go. Wow, no, I don't think we got to go through eschatology on his episode, but we covered a lot of other stuff. There was a deep dive into stuff beyond my pay grade. So
yeah. Well, I'm just saying that when people point to denominationalism, and especially if you're Orthodox, and you're like 58,000 denominated, blah blah blah. Yeah. Whatever. It's like we're working it out. It'll be all right.
It'll be good. Yeah. I really do appreciate any denomination that makes efforts to kind of retain or rediscover Catholicity.
Yeah.
And a lot of that being liturgy, the church calendar, getting inspiration from prayer books and from kind of the historical rhythms of the church.
Yeah.
There's a couple. So my co-host of this podcast is in a Reformed church, non-denominational Reformed, that is also very liturgical.
Okay.
And then I've got, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's called the Center for Baptist Renewal. And it is.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah. So it's a group of Baptists who are very committed to being Baptists, but they are trying to rediscover like they're going back to, I think, mainly Anglican sources to rediscover the Catholicity there. So,
well, you know what's really interesting is there was always this group, and I forget what they're called, but they have a specific name of these kind of high church Baptists that, like, they had a formal liturgy, they wore collars. I think a lot of them were mostly in Florida, if I remember correctly. But
interesting.
my wife's uncle is now a verger at the cathedral in Dallas for our REC diocese. And he got into it. I mean, they were raised like Southern Baptist, okay? And but he got into it through that group of kind of high church Baptists, and went from there into the Episcopal Church, into the REC. But yeah, so there's a tradition there. And really, I mean, it's all of our tradition. It's what we all came out of, you know. And I'm not even talking about Rome and some of its errors or anything like that. But going way back, let's reach back to when I talked about getting out of the worship industry. One of the things that I didn't know, having come from the Methodist Church into all that, I didn't really know much about revivalism. So I'd be playing at camps and stuff, and there'd be all this goofy stuff going on, the big altar calls and all that jazz. And I didn't know what any of that was, and I didn't know where it came from. So I started studying all that, and studying Finney, and just where it all went off the rails and got goofy.
Yeah. Second Great Awakening.
Yeah. And that's why so many people in like your Baptistic evangelical style worship service don't realize that's not their original tradition. That's the camp meeting that took over.
Yeah.
But if you go back to even early Baptist worship, yeah, it's puritanical and it's more simple, but it's nothing like, you know, music, lecture, altar call. You know, it's not like that at all.
Yeah.
So, like you're saying, that kind of formal structure and that kind of rhythm to the church worship, you know, it's what we all came from, and that's one of the, you know, it's one of the problems with what's going on now. We've just sold that inheritance in so many circles.
Well, and when you rediscover that, like, there's so much value there.
Yeah.
Like, just for your own edification of your soul.
Right.
Like, yeah, for sure. And, you know, of course there's the sacramental aspect, which some of them would not share. I'm curious, how long, because you mentioned singing several contemporary songs during the Eucharist or communion, Lord's Supper, whatever you want to call it. So I think ours, in my church, I'm not on any formal worship team or anything like that. I think ours is normally about 15 to 20 minutes of when the elements begin to be consecrated and that sort of thing. How long does your church take? I know the size will vary, but
yeah. Well, our parish on a Sunday is usually, like, right now we still have 2 services, which is kind of a holdover from the COVID nonsense. But if we're all together on a Sunday morning, if we had one worship service, we'll probably have between 50 to 75 people. And it's a small room, so only a few people can come up to the rail at a time. And we don't practice kind of the come and go. It's like everyone gets the elements, then they're dismissed, and then everyone comes and gets the elements and they're dismissed. So once the elements have been consecrated and we're actually just formally in the communion distribution, it's good 15, 20 minutes probably. Okay. I'll always sing at least one hymn and then 3 or 4 worship songs. So yeah, 15, 20 minutes, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I timed it once because I was talking with a guy in a non-liturgical church, and he talked about how it takes 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And I was like, and obviously they're not sacramental, so it's not.
And they're passing the trays too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got the deacons ready to go, and everyone gets it all at once, and then here's the bread, here's the wine or juice. Yeah.
Yeah. juice and crackers.
Right.
So my church has a circular rail around. So our pews, of course, semicircle at least around
Yeah.
the altar, and the rail is mostly circular. So, but it's still, even then it's probably a few hundred or so, I think.
Oh, wow.
Low twos, maybe high ones, something like that. Because we have 2 services as well. The early one, which I can't get my family to yet because I have a small child and a wife. And that's at 8, and that's it's called the traditional service. So it would be more high church. But anyways, I'm just kind of curious about that. Ever since I had that discussion with him, I'm like, I wonder how long it takes. So yeah. Fun times. Let's see. I think I know the answer to this one, but Lewis, Tolkien, or Chesterton?
Oh, you froze on me. Is it Lewis, Tolkien, Chesterton?
Yeah, Lewis, Tolkien, or Chesterton?
Tolkien. Okay. Love the other guys too, but I'm a Tolkien nerd. I mean, again, I grew up in the 70s, man. I was playing Dungeons and Dragons when it first came out, and
awesome.
I was reading Tolkien when I was in like 5th grade. So I've been a big Tolkien nerd forever.
I think I read almost everything that he had written in high school, or at least by the end of high school.
Awesome.
My cigar and gaming group we're playing Dungeons and Dragons right now. So
cool.
That's kind of,
I remember when the original Monster Manual and Dungeon Master's Guide and all that first came out. We had already been playing because the first Dungeons and Dragons was in this little box, and you just had these little booklets and the dice, and that was it. And
that's awesome.
We really got into it. Yeah,
that was back with Thaco, the different kinds of calculating your armor and all that stuff. Like I came in much later than that, obviously, so I never had to dig into the intricacies of the early stuff.
Yeah. Well, we were kids, so we probably, didn't follow the rules very well back then. We all ended up with these massively powerful characters striding across the worlds, Yeah.
To me, that's kind of the point,
Yeah, of course.
Love it. So what's on your reading list right now? What are you reading?
Man, I'm so busy. I'm hardly ever reading. So I've just read some things that I'm just kind of peripherally interested in. Like Steve Deace had a book out that I read recently. I was reading one of Wilson's books, and I kind of got bogged down into it. I'm looking forward to his new book, actually, on Mere Christendom. Other than that, man, I really just, for the past 3 years, I just haven't really had a lot of reading time. So I'm pretty lame about that. I was reading Jules' Apology of the Church of England, or for the Church of England, and I'm almost done with that because I feel like that's something I should have been more well-versed in a long time ago. So
yeah, I feel like the phone has really killed my attention span.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got an enormous pile of books that I want to read, and I am thinking about reading them.
Yeah, me too. And I've got things that like I'm not really a guy anymore that reads a lot of fiction. And I kind of think that's not good. And there's several works that I feel like I need to, like it's been a long time since I've read Lord of the Rings, even though Tolkien was my answer. So I probably need to go back and do that, I will occasionally pick up the Silmarillion and go through, since it's such a bunch of short stories, I'll do that. But I've been thinking I need to read Dune again, especially with the movie, because I love the movie. So I need to read Dune again. One of my very favorite series of sci-fi fantasy books is The Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny.
Oh, yeah. I've got the omnibus edition back there.
Oh, awesome. Well,
yeah,
I have always loved those books, and I love to go through them again and again. And it's been a while since I've done that too. I tell my wife, I'm trying to get her to read them because it's told in first person. And I always say my inner monologue is a lot like Corwin. So I just love reading those books. I love his attitude. And it's such a great story.
It's been a while since I've read them, but
yeah. Did you read the sequels with Merlin?
I think so.
Because it's 10 books now. No, it's more than 10 books.
Oh, maybe not. I'd have to dig around because I've got like a giant like omnibus version of it.
Yeah.
But that was bought a few years ago, so I might not have the most current ones.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Before he died, he wrote a second part, and it was all Corwin's son, Merlin. Okay. And it was all told from his point of view growing up in the courts of chaos instead of in amber. So it's really cool. It's got a lot of magic and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That does kind of ring a bell. Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to give a spoiler, but there's this one joke that he sets up, and I think he wrote 2 or 3 of the books just to set up this one joke with a particular demon called a taiga. And I'll leave it at that. You should read the Merlin books.
Yeah, I need to go back and revisit now. Have you ever heard of the Malazan Book of the Fallen?
I have not. So
I try to get all my friends to read a massive series. And of course, there's 2 authors. The ideas for these books came when they were playing their Advanced Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Okay. And one of them is an anthropologist and the other is a historian of some type or something like that. I might be misremembering. And they have this massive world that they've written about. And they're just, to me, they're like one of the pinnacles of sci-fi. It's sci-fi fantasy. Right. There are elements of sci-fi as well. So if you feel like taking on a massive undertaking, and the problem is there's 10 books in the one series, and there's 3 different storylines. So you read the first 3 books, and it starts those 3 different storylines.
I don't know if I could commit. Yeah.
It's not for the faint of heart,
right?
But there's a lot of I've got a lot of stuff back there. I just read it all when I was a lot younger, and wasn't addicted to my phone the same way.
I've got a huge library that I need to get back to.
Yeah. Let's see. What Bible versions do you use?
Lately, I have really been digging into the Lexham, which is the Logos app's new translation, and the Legacy, which is a new NASB, I think. And I'll tell you why. I was reading the Holman a lot, just because things are a little different. And when things are put a little different, you get out of your comfort zone of what you're used to reading all the time.
Yeah.
But my thing with the Lexham and the Legacy is I have this real problem with the all caps Lord superstition when it comes to the Old Testament. And so both of these translations will use Yahweh. And that's just kind of a pet peeve of mine, because it's just superstition. Gotcha. And it always...
I was going to say, I hadn't heard of the Lexham English Bible.
Yeah. It's basically the people behind the Logos app. I think it's their translation, but it seems to be pretty good.
Interesting.
But like one of the Psalms we did Sunday was all, praise the name of the Lord. Let the Lord's name be praised. The Lord this, and I'm like, it says Yahweh. It's supposed to be praise the name of Yahweh. So that's
interesting.
Yeah. That's one of the things that bugs me. So when I'm reading the Old Testament, I like to just see it written. And I know that, we're not sure that's how to pronounce it and all that kind of jazz, but we anglicize Jesus. So.
Yeah. Cause some people, you're kind of dealing with a cult member though, when they want to like add a bunch of A's and Y's to Jesus' name.
Oh yeah.
You ever see that online?
Yeah. It's like either like someone who is, your average messianic guy is some gringo that like converted to it,
Yeah.
Or you got the Hebrew Israelite guys or whatever, making up their own Hebrew. Yeah, anytime someone gets crazy with Yeshua or Yahshua, or they just start
Yeah.
going like that, it's like, okay, I get what you're trying to do, but you're
Yeah, you can dial it back a bit. It's fine. It's
yeah,
okay.
you want it, like, we get it. Okay, are you happy? We get it.
Do you have a favorite like historical hymn writer?
When it comes to music, Ralph Vaughan Williams, we do a lot of his stuff.
Okay.
He was not a believer, so but
Interesting.
yeah, but he was really great at taking English folk tunes and harmonizing them and setting beautiful hymn lyrics to them, and we sing a lot of those at Church of the Holy Trinity. So musically, yeah, him. I like obviously you got to say like Watts and Toplady, and we have a lot of just really great stuff in the hymnal. So
Yeah.
but
So does the REC or the ACNA have an actual hymnal?
yes,
Is unique to them?
yeah. In 2017, we came out with a hymnal called the Book of Common Praise, and which there had been a Book of Common Praise. I don't know if it was in the 1800s or early 1900s or something, but it was the idea that was our hymn book to go along with the Book of Common Prayer. So that these would be the common hymns that we're all using across our churches. We had a really great panel of musicians led by a gentleman named Christopher Hoyt, who's up in Tyler now. He's a brilliant organist, and he headed up the committee for that. And the idea was the Episcopal Church's 1940 hymnal was going out of print. The Episcopal Church was no longer going to support it anymore because they have their 1982, kind of wacko hymnal.
Yeah,
but a lot of the traditional Episcopal and Anglican parishes will use the 1940. So they took a bunch of the hymns that were used from the 1940 and brought them over into this, but they added a lot of things that were not in the 1940, things like Amazing Grace and Great Is Thy Faithfulness and hymns like that were not in our hymnal. And so they brought in a lot of those. And then an interesting thing about the REC is our denomination, our diocese of the South is mostly made up of Black churches that were brought in after the Civil War because the Episcopal Church wouldn't have them, and the REC brought them in. So their music is very much in kind of the Southern Black gospel tradition, but they are, very committed Anglicans in their worship. So we brought in, a lot of that music too. So
interesting.
So it's called the Book of Common Praise. It has another name that they made, like a more generic name for non-Anglicans to use, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's the 2017 Book of Common Praise, and it's a really, really good hymnal.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I was kind of curious about that because I know, like, obviously Methodism, well, I would say most of American Christianity is an offshoot of Anglicanism at some level, especially Methodism.
Sure. Yeah.
So is there any, like, do you have a lot of Wesley in there as well? Charles Wesley?
Yeah. I should have named him too. Of course, he's one of the hymn writers that everyone loves. He's brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah, universal appeal. So this brings me to my other question: Martin Luther, Charles Wesley, or Ira D. Sankey?
Or who?
Ira D. Sankey.
I don't know who that is.
He was Dwight L. Moody's like hymn writer and right hand man.
Oh, okay. Here's an interesting fact. One of our bishops was president of Moody Bible College. Yeah, I forget his name, but I played a conference up there once, which was really interesting because the speakers were Vodi Bakum, John Piper, and MacArthur.
Oh, wow.
But I liked getting to walk around there, and they had like these kind of glass portraits of all the past presidents, and he's in his collar, so that was cool.
That's funny.
Okay, of all those, I guess I would pick Luther.
Yeah, Luther's got some really good hymns that I like. Everyone's aware of "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," but
yeah, we've got a few.
Yeah.
There's a Christmas hymn. I forget the name, but I introduced it this past Christmas that he wrote. It's fantastic. So, yeah, and that was another addition to the Book of Common Praise too. It's a bunch of Lutheran hymns that we didn't have.
That's
way
cool.
Too many for Christmas. I mean, we have something like 80 Christmas carols and hymns, and I'm like, how could you ever do them? I mean, we do 12 days of Christmas, and even so, I mean, you never get to them. Yeah.
That's where I don't mind starting Christmas music earlier in Advent, just because it's such a short season. I feel like anyway.
Yeah, we keep a proper Advent here at the Simmons house. Not enough Ascension hymns, because that's another one of my soapbox issues. We have neglected the Ascension, and it used to be a bigger deal than Christmas.
Yeah, I was at a very passing familiarity with the church calendar, but only in the very general sense. Yeah. So I knew about Advent and Lent. I didn't know that Advent, that Christmas didn't start until, the 25th or the 24th, depending on and then, Epiphany was a thing, right? And then, so it's been fun getting to know that for sure.
Man, one of the best things people can do is keep a proper Advent. Don't fall for the hype. But then when Christmas hits, party for 12 days. I always make a point of it and celebrate the Epiphany. And man, it'll change your life.
Yeah.
But also keep Ascension Day. That'll change your life.
Was that, you said you just wrote a song for that. Is that coming up or?
Yeah, it's on, I think it's the 18th. It's 40 days after Easter.
Okay. That's right.
So it's always on a Thursday, so no one comes. And then you'll have Ascension Sunday, where that's where most churches will actually observe it.
Does your church do matins and vespers as well during the week, or?
No, we're not big enough, and we're spread out enough that it doesn't really work to have morning and evening prayer. Gotcha. We used to do it a couple times a week. We would get together for morning prayer, but Holy Trinity is right near downtown Houston. And, you're from Dallas, so Houston is just. And so I'm out here in Katy, so I'm 20 minutes from the church, and, other parishioners are on other parts of the, other sides of town. And so we all kind of come together on Sunday. So it's hard to get something like that going during the week. Most of us will practice some kind of morning and evening prayer at home.
Yeah, it is a lot easier if you're local, very local to the church, and you have a schedule that allows you to, even attend. Half the people, or maybe half or more, have commutes and all that sort of thing, and it'd be unfortunately not an option. But
I would love it, and a lot of Anglican parishes will do a thing where they have morning prayer before the communion service, and then they'll have evening prayer around 5:00 on a Sunday. And I would love for us to do that. The genius of those two services was basically Cranmer bringing the monastic liturgy of the hours to the common people. Yeah. And having, obviously, if you're basically a bunch of farmers and herdsmen and stuff and tradesmen in the town, you're all centered on that parish, and every day can start and end with prayer and in the church, because you all walk there. And that would be ideal, but we don't have that right now.
I've been reading the Benedict option by Rod Dreher. Yeah. And that's the latest chapter I was in. He was talking about how a lot of these communities, and he went through a bunch of different types of denominational and even religious, a bunch of these communities, when they live in close proximity, that's really the only way they can do that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Like you have to be geographically on top of each other,
Yep.
So,
and although I don't think it's a good option, I mean, this is an option, even having, like a couple of us, well, not a couple of us, a few of the men of the church, we have like a Zoom prayer meeting. And, although we don't do like evening prayer, we just kind of pray for each other. But, there are churches that get that going. I don't like it. Like I bristle at anything online since the COVID because I'm kind of one of those guys.
Yeah. Well, if people are interested in hearing your music, getting to know you a bit better, where can they find you?
Probably Twitter would be the best option. I'm at Johnny Drummer, no E in drummer. And you could look up Church of the Holy Trinity on we have a website, but really our biggest online presence is Facebook. That's where we stream the services.
Okay.
And I'm on SoundCloud with like really bad demos of the music that I've written and a link to the PDF of it. There is not a formal recording of Raise a Glass to the King because I've always resisted that. Like I think going into a studio or here at my studio even and just overdubbing it and doing a legit recording kind of does violence to the spirit of the thing. Like I think if I ever was going to do a real recording of it, I would just want to set up multi-tracks and cut it live with a bunch of friends and beers and stuff. But, okay, we didn't even talk about this. I did have a Raise a Glass to the King podcast.
Yeah.
And I did a little over 100 episodes. And it was basically supposed to be kind of a nightly toast to Jesus with a little meditation on various things. And anyway, if you look up Raise a Glass to the King on Twitter, or you look it up on your podcast client of choice, you can find that. And there was always a link to the sheet music. So if you want to hear what it sounds like and start using it, I would highly encourage that. That's what I wrote it for.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was it called? Cheers to the King, or?
It's at Cheers to the King on Twitter. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. I did check out a couple episodes. I'm like, and what made you stop it?
Not enough interest. I loved to do it, and I really poured myself into it during the shutdowns and all of that. But poured myself into it anyway. But I would do it 2 or 3 times a week, and it just became, a lot of work for not a lot of return. No one was really interested, so I just quit doing it.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, I mean, if people showed interest and I thought about doing it again, I would. But I think I'm kind of done with it.
Okay. Have you thought about like changing up the format or anything, like going longer form or something?
Well, I had done a podcast before that called the Christian Drummers Podcast, and it was like a kind of a blend of me talking about some theological topics, me talking about drumming, and just various things like that. Me thoughts about worship music and playing and all that. Again, it was way more work than people were interested in, having it pay off. So
yeah,
I'm just probably not cut out to be a podcaster. People weren't interested, so I gave it a shot, and I like the episodes I came up with, and I collected 40 of them into a Easter to Ascension devotional, where each one's a nightly devotional and end with a toast, so you party all the way through Easter. But
yeah, but it does semi-related. It does strike me that Lent and Easter and Advent and Christmas have a very similar feel in the type of like, solemnity of one season moving into celebration.
Yeah. Preparing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Man, I really enjoyed this. Thanks.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, man. I'm so thankful you had me on. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to have you on again sometime.
Anytime.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And so thanks everyone for joining us. If you like the conversation, then please like the video. And if you think you have a friend who would enjoy this as well, go ahead and share that with them. It helps us out, and we really appreciate it. So thanks for watching. Until next time, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace.